Hello, hello everybody. The usual, can you hear me? Please say in the chat if you can hear me. At the moment it says no one's watching, so maybe...
I'm watching.
You're watching? It's got a big 0 I can see.
No, there's a couple of people watching.
Yeah, well, DJ and Green Tea have been being early. Keen people. Good to see you all.
Go and talk and I'll listen.
Okay. All right, I've got an audience of Liz anyway, but she can't be bothered with it, so...
Oh yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah. All right, brilliant. Okay, so yes, a little continuation of my Grail talk, but taking it off on a few different tangents. But yeah, it just seems to getting very gory, really. But it just seems to be taking it back. All these legends. It's very much seems to be around the connection of the land with the body of a king, but also this connection with legends of a goddess. But I thought we'd start with this image that I've got here, which is one that Liz took when we were in Tintagel a couple of years ago, and Liz was looking down at the island where the ruins of the castle is, the castle where it, in some legends at least, Arthur was supposed to have been conceived. And she was like, oh, that's a face on the side of the island. And it's like, it is very spooky. It does look incredibly like a face there. But and afterwards found out that that's been noted before, and people talk about, you know, that it's Arthur's face or something like that in the
next one's got the drawing
in the land. Yeah. And all connected up with the legends of the idea that he's going to come back and be a savior. Hi, Johnny. But before this, you know, Liz was noticing that, not so much thinking of, oh, this is the face of Arthur, but if you note that they obviously in these ruins here at some stage they built this wall around there. So obviously the actual, what you would say, the face outline is actually natural in the rock, which is quite uncanny. But then this wall, which has obviously been added later, a man-made thing, actually looks like it's adding some more horns to it.
You're gonna go to the
Yeah, yes, I am. Yeah.
Oh.
So yeah, just to make it clear there. But I just wanted to start with that really, because it seems to me to just encapsulate this idea of all these things around the Grail legends, and it being,
looks like people are going into his mouth.
Connection with the king, the king of the land. But yeah, as Liz points out, this new bridge that they've got to go across to the island, people are walking along it, and it was like basically they're walking into his mouth, which also seems a bit dark. So I just thought to start with that, just this idea of the connection of the land and the King Arthur legends. But yeah, this idea that they've demonized it, and a legend of a savior king who's supposed to come back to save us, but it's like the addition of the wall has made it into a sort of demon figure, and it's like, is it actually a demon that's coming back to take us over? So although I'm not going to spend much time in the West Country, obviously there are all the connections of Arthur to Glastonbury Abbey, but the sort of, I was reading in one book, which you probably won't be able to see because I'm only little on my image there, but this Arthur the King in the West by R.W. Dunning. But basically the idea there that the Glastonbury Abbey, the monks there, they sort of appropriated possibly the idea of Arthur being buried there as a way of getting prestige and making it the most sought after place for pilgrimage, and getting all these favors and money coming into it and patronage. but again, this idea of the legend or the myths or rituals being appropriated by people wanting to make it into something that is a way of a source of power and that sort of thing.
You can make it bigger, the picture.
Okay, well, I'm going to move on anyway. I'm not wrong cursor. There. No, we don't need to make this bigger because this is one of Liz's drawings. So the Glastonbury tour. I just wanted to again just drop that in, just because this Tanishka that I mentioned before, the Moon Woman that we saw in Glastonbury Symposium, and she was talking about how she visited the tour and she was having visions there and feeling a connection with fairy or nature spirits within the tour and that sort of thing. And to me, that was a more magical and intrinsic connection with, well, both with the landscape, but also with the rituals of the past. And I think really what I'm going to get at with this talk is going back to these the ancient legends and how these all sort of connected in and fed into the Grail legends and what came since, and in turn how that fed into the Crusades, the Templars, and all this idea again of going back to the Middle East and taking up these rituals and what we'll call the Grail, but it just in terms of a symbolic thing of taking up the symbolic representations of power, but how it became just a form of wielding prestige and forging empire rather than something spiritual. So just the last thing from the Glastonbury area, the Chalice Well, place we know well, of course, but this idea of all right, this idea of where it has the red water, which we know, of course, now high iron content in the water. But Tanishka, I don't know, Tanishka's not the only person that's talked about it, but the idea of the red water representing the blood of the Earth Mother. But then there's also a white spring around the Chalice Well at the foot of the Tor. And that apparently represented the semen of the Sky Father. Oh. So
I'm not going paddling in that.
I haven't got a picture of that. You'll be glad to. I haven't got a representation of that. But again, it's the idea of and the land being embodied and water being like blood, and how these were in the rituals of the past, where human blood, the blood of humans, the blood of sacrifice, whether it be of a king, or just unfortunate lots of everyday people, and how that was connected with the well-being of the land and the strength of the land. So yeah, just for this is just a little drawing that, I mean, DJ was mentioning that picture that I had at the start. It was supposed to be a picture of John the Baptist, but again, that John the Baptist, the head on a plate, was one of these situations where, like so many things, where the Christian stories had taken on something that was used, for centuries before in rituals and myths and of other places. So that was sort of just another a Christianization of it, if you like. But it also figures a lot in many of the Grail legends, where there is also the a head on the plate, and this connects with these ideas of the Fisher King, which I believe this is a drawing of here, and of course it's got the nice checkerboard floor and pillars in the background. But the legend of the Fisher King, I think, is quite a striking one, which connects in with a lot of the Grail legends, the King Arthur legends. So this idea that there's it comes in very different forms, but there's a king who's been wounded, and there's often also reference to like a bleeding lance, which is maybe gave him the wound. He's often said to be injured in the groin, so obviously that relates to some sort of impairing of fertility. But this king, he's wounded, he's in pain, he can't rule effectively. He just spends his days fishing, and at night he's just watching the goings on in his castle. But he's not an effective ruler, and because of that, intrinsically connected with the health and the well-being of the king is the land, the country that he rules. So when the king's ailing, the land that he's in charge of is also falling apart. So and then there's a prophecy that's given to the king that says only when the king is healed will the land be healed, and only a young fool has power to heal him. So again, I'm sure this also connects in with things that come into the tarot and things like that. So one pure of heart has to ask the right question to heal the king, and which will then heal the land that he rules. And so a youth turns up. Youth, Parsifal, and the Fisher King thinks this could be the youth in the prophecy, and that's gonna make everything right. So he invites him to stay, and then when Parsifal's during the night in the castle, he wakes up and there's this procession of maidens. The first with a lance with golden platter, and I think in some of the representations it's got a head in it, and the third a gold chalice. Obviously collects up with a lot of images of the Grail, like a chalice, a cup. And he's fascinated, but he's also afraid to say anything, so he doesn't ask any questions. And the next morning he wakes up and the castle's gone, everything's disappeared, and he realized that he's seen the Grail. He had the opportunity to make everything right, to restore the kingdom, but he failed it because he didn't have the will or the imagination or whatever. So he didn't take it, and everything sort of faded away. So all around this is this idea that the king and the land are one, and if the man has a wasted potential, he thinks only of himself, not how to serve the land or the people, then the land will fall into disrepair. So as I say, there's lots of very different versions, but I think this is, as I was saying in the previous talk around what Tanishka was talking about, how she was saying that she believed that the origins of the Grail is actually around the word Grail, meaning blood, and it was these rituals that used to take place. And it wasn't just for kings; it was for anyone, but it was both for women and men in terms of going through different stages of life. And for men in particular, because they didn't have the natural connection with the cycles of the moon and the earth, intrinsic to them, which was with women's connected to their menstrual cycle, back to blood again. But so men require these rituals, that they needed guidance of a female figure like a priestess to take them through these crucial moments of life. And again, without these, they wouldn't have the mental capacity to grow into manhood, to get into these different stages of life where they had to take on other responsibility and have the wisdom and the understanding where they could be good men, if you like. And in terms of the transition for a king to become a good king, it would need again some sort of ritual to take them through, to give them the ability to understand and to rule effectively, and not just be out to serve themselves. So although the king would be male, he would need the female priestess to give him the ability to rule effectively. So I think this all runs into these idea of the Fisher King, where there's a king that somehow hasn't got this, has lost this connection. The Fisher King first appears in Chrétien de Troyes' Percival, the Story of the Grail, in the late 12th century. So obviously there would have been many oral tales before, but in terms of where it gets recorded and written down, so the character's roots may lie in Celtic mythology. It may be derived from the figure of Bran the Blessed. I always think of Brian Blessed whenever I say that, but Bran the Blessed in the Mabinogion, which I apologise to Welsh people if I'm mispronouncing that. But again, this is the book that I was discussing last time, Caitlin Matthews, the Divine Feminine in the Mabinogion, King Arthur and the Goddess of the Land, which talks a lot about these different stories and how they filter in to the King Arthur story. So in this Celtic mythology, Bran the Blessed, Bran is a cauldron that can resurrect the dead, albeit imperfectly. Those thus revived cannot speak. He gives this cauldron to the King of Ireland as a wedding gift for him and Bran's sister Branwen. Later, Bran wages war on the Irish and is wounded in the foot or leg. So you've got the idea of the wounded king, and the cauldron is destroyed. And the cauldron, what was a cauldron in the stories, became transformed, into Grail in later myths. Also, you've got cups as well as in the tarot, different receptacles. But so the cauldron's destroyed. He asks his followers to sever his head and take it back to Britain, and his head continues talking and keeps them company on their trip. The group lands on the island of Grails, where they spent 80 years in a castle of joy and abundance, but eventually they leave and bury Bran's head in London. This story has analogues in two other important Welsh texts. So there's other tales of King Arthur's men travelling to Ireland to retrieve a magical cauldron. But there you've got this concept there of the severed head and it being like a sort of oracle and still talking after it's been taken off the body. And the idea somehow that the head of the king can be buried in the land to maybe transmit something to this land or to restore something to the land. And as I say, you've got mention of a cauldron which can produce an abundance for people. So it's sort of like this idea of a grail which has sort of magical properties. So these legends keep repeating, but there's so many themes that are they keep repeating, and I think it goes even further back than that, as we'll see. But so the in this picture here is the bloodied head on a plate, which is part of one of these early Grail stories. So, and that's, I think, from another one of the Grail stories, Peredur, one of the Welsh stories, when the Fisher King presents Peredur with a severed head on a platter. And Peredur later learns that he was related to the king and that the severed head was that of his cousin, whose death he must avenge by defeating the 9 witches. So, and which is definitely something that's going to come up again in the talk as well. But I know I'm going to hear a Liz groan in a moment, but again, it takes me back to Turkey and what I was talking about there, where there's, as part of the early cults, religions there, the removal of the head was something that was important after death to, well, before death, it definitely will be unfortunate. But the idea was that the soul its home was in the head. So they would remove the head, and that would often maybe be kept in a special place. Whereas the rest of the body perhaps was given a sky burial or perhaps cremated or something like that. But it was all about removing the head because that was the soul. So in terms of the soul going to the underworld or the afterlife, the spirit world, it was felt it needed to be removed from the material body. So again, this idea of decapitation goes back, thousands of years. So obviously these images here are from Göbekli Tepe, as you know, if I've bored you enough about it, they're 10,000 plus years ago. So these are, went back there. So I think this was sort of like a stone figure, and the head had been deliberately removed from that. This figure here, I think it's supposed to be holding a human head, and there's quite a lot of iconography where you've got something like a spirit animal, maybe on top of a human head, sort of riding on their back. This psychopomp idea, where it would take the soul up to the underworld or to the afterlife. And of course, we've got this the famous pillar again from Enclosure D. And as I mentioned before, you've got the figure down the bottom, which has got the head removed. It seems to be riding maybe on the back of this bird, or a dinosaur, as Liz once said. And this potentially up here is the head from the body, and it's like it's maybe ascending up to the heavens. This potentially could be some sort of primordial sea towards the afterlife. So yeah, the idea of decapitation and its connection with the rituals of the death of the material body, but then the transition of the soul to the afterlife. And I suppose the suppose now with the sort of the Christian terminology or mythology, if you like, it's sort of separation now of the heaven, the good place to go after death in the sky, and hell, the underworld, which is bad. But I get the impression that was more of a, there wasn't a separation of the two in a lot of these old belief systems, and it was just the underworld was the afterlife. So it wasn't there wasn't necessarily a two separate places, from what I can gather and remember of things that I picked up along the way. But yeah, this idea of the head being removed was again important for the idea of moving to a different state in the spiritual world. And with so many of these old myths and legends, there were these ideas of rebirth, and obviously that's all come into the idea of, goes into the idea of Christianity and Christ rising from the dead. So again, you've got these different types of mythology, but they're connected with these, they're often very gruesome in terms of the symbology, and the severed heads being one of them. So as I say, this just go back briefly to Caitlin Matthews' book, and this quote from there: "The matter of Britain." Again, she refers to the matter of Britain. You've got matter. My wife will be asleep in a moment, I expect.
Hey?
Matter, I said you'll be asleep in a minute, I expect.
I'm listening to this.
Oh, what?
Something else.
Something else. This is listening to something else, everybody. Well, at least she's not getting bored at me anyway. She's bored at something else. So the matter of Britain. So matter has the same root, the word, as mater, mother. So matter of Britain storytellers unconsciously inherited what the early poets, seers and sibyls knew. Motifs of wasteland and the wounded king, cauldrons that give life, sacrificial kings whose heads are borne on mystical dishes, wronged maidens and misguided knights all lie at the heart of the matter. The empowerment of the king by sovereignty, and that was a term she used for like a goddess of the land, has become subsumed in the Grail quest, while the surrounding lore into a morass of courtly love and chivalric adventure. So again, it's the idea that these ancient rituals, which were all about connections with the land and the sky, is something intrinsic, where the people's bodies would be alive with the land and totally connected to the land. That's all been increasingly over time. The connections have been lost and have been separated, and it gets all this confusion of different stories, and it becomes romantic adventures, and about quests and physical conflicts, and also courtly love, courtly love, but it's losing the connection with the real earth and the land. And we certainly see that that's something obviously that's becoming more and more apparent with our time, as we're just the connection or disconnection between people and nature is just becoming more and more dramatic, and they're pushing it as the way to go. and the way of evolution is to, you know, transhumanism, all the things that we know about, and that the natural is something to be avoided and moved away from. Now, this all links again during my talk about Stanton Drew, when I went there with Hugh Newman from the Megalithomania, and I mentioned as part of that a really interesting talk which you can get on YouTube, which Maria Wheatley did on one of the Megalithomania conferences, talking about Stanton Drew, linking it in with Avebury and other things. But she was talking there about the connections with the goddess and the divine feminine. She believed that Stanton Drew particularly was a site that was a feminine site connected to the moon. And, you know, we have some other sites. I think she mentioned Stonehenge as being a male one, to do with the sun more. But she talked about the central role that women played in prehistory in the Neolithic era. And mentioned how it seemed that a lot of women were treated differently after death to the men. The men would have, you know, burials in long barrows, being positioned there, and their bodies would be intact. But it seems that the women, or at least maybe it was certain particularly revered women, priestesses or healers, they were often, some of their bones, some of their body would be buried, excuse me, but some bones would be kept. And she said even sort of over 500 years, certain bones would be kept and moved around the land and placed in certain parts of land within it. So they were referred to as individual. I think that's maybe a term some archaeologists have used or something like that. But they were, it seemed that they were like the Wheatley made the connection with saintly relics that you get now, and that's sort of coming a bit to what I'm going to talk about later. But this idea of where relics, bones, fragments of the bodies of people who are considered saints, how they're given, they're supposed to control, they're supposed to have certain properties, and these relics and the places where they're kept, it's got a special significance. But maybe the origins of that do go back to this practice where they used to carry bones around, and as I say, maybe move them around the land, maybe put them in a different place, maybe to mark a new area of the country as people moved about, something like that. But also the bones used to be ground up, put in more sort of low in liminal places around the edges of sites or at the entrance ways, almost like a sort of a guardian, a mother guardian figure somehow to certain sites. Perhaps also giving a sort of charging it with energy, something like that. And as I say, this was also the female figure in relation to a lot of these ancient sites was connected with the moon. And particularly the time of the moon around the winter solstice. Now this connects in with what Tanishka was saying about these rituals for men when they were going to reach the age of 21, and that was considered then the time when they would be going into adulthood. So there'll be a ritual then. But also the winter solstice is considered the most feminine time. The winter is considered the feminine time, summer the male time. So it was supposed to be that men needed a ceremony around this period of the winter solstice, the darkest time, because they needed that. Again, this is connected again with these ideas of the underworld, because it's and connected with with death, obviously, because the winter solstice, the darkest, shortest day. It's all around the sort of mini death of the earth, where so much of nature dies away at this period during the middle of the deepest part of the winter, and then of course it will start to regrow, rebirth as you go through to towards spring. So all these rituals again are connected to this idea of death and rebirth, and it's around this time of the winter solstice. But this image here is taken from Maria's talk. She did a megalithomania, but this was the fragments of pottery, and this, as I say, is made from, or it's got fragments of human bone within it. So she was saying that apart from mainly female bones being maybe moved around, kept as relics, but then maybe at significant points in time and place, being moved about and put in different parts of the country. They would also have cups, pots, and they would have grooves in these pots, and some of these, mainly women's bones would be ground up into very fine powder, and then it would be put in the grooves of these pots. So people will be eating or drinking out of the receptacles that would actually have the dead matter, if you like, of these perhaps a revered figure. So that would seem to me to be something that would be maybe the very deepest origins of the idea of a grail or a cup, something that would carry with it a representation of rebirth, or passing on to the underworld, to the afterlife. But perhaps ritualistically, if they were drinking from cups that contained the essence of, as I say, maybe a revered woman priestess from maybe hundreds of years before even, that would be seen to be some sort of charge, some sort of ritualistic way of I suppose maybe carrying the spirit of that person and then passing it through to new generations. So it seemed to me quite clear that could be where the origins of things like the Grail and the cups, which you get in the tarot, which is all around the same idea. As I say, it also developed in some of the other myths, Celtic myths, as a cauldron. But this idea of a receptacle that would somehow have life-giving properties, and maybe about the transition from death to life, that seemed to me to be an important crossing over point. So Maria was talking about when there was a new moon around closest to the winter solstice. For some days, it would appear almost as if the moon has disappeared completely. There will be no moon. So you have again this period when it's the darkest period in the sky, and this will be representative of death. And then as over the next 3 to 5 days, it would be like perhaps ritualistically going back into the womb, and then a rebirth as the moon started to grow fuller, and obviously, and then as it progressed to the days starting to get longer and light starting to come into the nature. So apologies, it's just, and another thing that Maria mentioned in this same talk, talking about the Bronze Age, they had seemed common where they would deliberately break bronze artifacts and put them in watery places, not in the earth, but in places of water. And I think there is an example of a sword being broken in two and put into a lake. And she mentioned Francis Pryor, thinking that's where the Lady of the Lake myth came from. So again, you've got a connection there with things that went into the Grail legends thousands of years later. So I think it seems clear to me that it's these Neolithic time rituals around the megalithic stones, the circles, and obviously there would be rituals connected with these sites, with energy, powerful places that would direct the energy of the earth and the sky, and people would go into these places and they would feel this energy and get connection with the different seasons and the different cycles of the planet, of the stellar bodies and the moon. And these rituals then in time move away from these different eras, but the traces of these rituals would form into different kinds of myths and legends, and these would be transmitted through different people as they moved around different places. And then these rituals, they were performed, and then legends that were just told orally, and then they would become something that was hundreds, thousands of years later would end up when there was writing, that they would be written down. And also before that, symbolically, you've got things like the tarot, where it will be in images, representations. So, and these are still reverberating now to our own time, but it does seem that there was very much I don't think you could just say one clear breaking point, although obviously there's been talk of it on the earlier talk when I was talking about the Bellino and Paul Wallace and what they've been talking about, the translations of the very earliest Hebrew texts of the Bible, and these ideas that maybe there was a division time in history, and or some kinds of beings from external place that suddenly enslaved humanity, things like that, changed how humanity was, and maybe there was just a break at something like that. But other than that, maybe it happened over time. But to go into where these sort of legends, further back, started to pass on and ingrain these different theories. Oh dear, what we've had So this is just a representation of Aphrodite. Again, obviously different places had different versions. Aphrodite, Venus. Again, different forms, as with the Grail legends, things like that. In the Cyprian version of Aphrodite, she compels the virgin Smyrna to seduce her drunken father. He goes to kill her, realizing that he sired a child. As the sword comes down, Aphrodite turns Smyrna into a myrrh tree. The blade splits the trunk, and out of that comes Adonis, who's the divine child. Now this is mentioned, I've sort of read a lot of this in, again, this goes back to previous talks. It always seems like a thread in both in the research that I've done and the travels done recently, but the Ted Hughes book, which I talked about in relation to Shakespeare when I did the Shakespeare talk, Shakespeare and the Goddess of Complete Being, and he goes into these early legends, which he says became like a formula, an equation, as he put it, which Shakespeare, I know also, as I discussed in that talk, don't think it's the Shakespeare, the person that's sort of considered to be in the mainstream. Probably, maybe I'm thinking it was a group of people, even with various different historic knowledge and talents. But anyway, it was following these themes and how they went into the stories of the later fiction of Shakespeare, which is obviously so influential, passing on these myths, reworking them again. But around this idea of legends like Aphrodite, you've got the goddess in three aspects: the mother, the sacred bride, and the queen of the underworld. So Aphrodite puts Adonis in a chest and gives it to Persephone, the queen of the underworld, to look after him. I forget the backstory. Persephone falls in love with Adonis. She won't give him back. Aphrodite appeals to Zeus, who says that they can each have him 6 months of the year. Again, this ties in with the idea of the seasons. But then when Aphrodite gets him, she doesn't want to give him back. So Persephone appears as a wild boar and kills Adonis. And then after his death, they each get him half a year each. Now, there was huge cults around these gods and goddesses. And in the original temple, which became the first Jewish temple, there was apparently it was prostitution, and the sort of priestesses were prostitutes, and females were premarital females were supposed to indulge in sex with people, and it was all part of these fertility rites. And as Hughes describes it, the Jehovan reformers that went into these early, or the Hebrew transformation and I suppose beginning of Judaism, called the goddess the Great Whore of Babylon. But again, this is maybe where what was a goddess of the land in these Neolithic times, and it was intrinsically connected with nature and the power of the earth, and there were aspects of the goddess that could be terrible. Obviously, nature could be destructive, and people that were living on the land would be aware of that more than anything else, so they'd know that it was something that could destroy them, and they had to be careful of, fearful of, revere. But also it could be beautiful as well, and it was nature. But then you get this division where it's the idea that the goddess is something disgusting, something to be feared, and it becomes that there's this a Jehovah God and the priest class, and they're in opposition to the goddess, and they see the goddess and perhaps the femininity which the goddess represents, and nature, you could say, that the goddess represents, as being things that are then this symbolic connection, that these are things that are something to be, well, they're considered tantamount to evil. So this the cults had an incarnation of the god in the king, and so their fates were identified with the king and the god, to be sacrificed and to be reborn. So you've got these important concepts of sacrifice and rebirth, and the idea that, as I say, the king went into these sort of Fisher King narratives later on. The idea that if the king is ailing, the land will be ailing, and perhaps then the king needs to be sacrificed in order for the land, the nation, the kingdom to be rejuvenated and reborn. So there was, in a lot of these cults, there was a ritual murder of the goddess's consort, the god king, by his successor. So that, and this sort of led to a sacrificial substitute, and there became other myths which had an extra figure of the god's murderous double, who emerged somehow connected to the goddess to usurp the reigning consort. So in the Adonis myth, the fatal double emerged as Mars, Aphrodite's jealous lover, who took the form of the wild boar. So again, we got the idea of the wild boar, and killed Adonis. So there are two versions side by side, with this represented by the boar. The boar can be the queen of the underworld in her enraged animal form, but also it can be this usurping double, some murderous warrior that also takes this animal form of the wild boar. So hence the boar on the front, the Hughes book. So according to Hughes, Shakespeare had this tragic equation in two forms. The hero rejects the goddess. So this could be obviously a female character within the play, maybe one who's quite an ideal character at some point. Hero rejects the goddess and is killed by the boar, which could be something which basically is some sort of madness that takes over the hero. So he turns to evil, he throws away all his good deeds and becomes destructive. So he's somehow transformed by this madness, which is like the boar. The second kind of boar is incarnated in this irrational, inferior, rival brothers in inverted commas. So not a literal brother, but so just off the top of my head, thinking of like a fellow, and you have Iago, and they're at the start of the play, I think, you know, they're brothers in arms and they're friends, and but then Iago is this, for whatever reason, he's a fellow seen as this great noble warrior, and Iago, whatever it may be, is jealous of a fellow and all how he's regarded, and his relationship with Desdemona, and so he plots against him. So that idea where you have some sort of irrational or inferior, evil rival to the hero, and he usurps the hero by killing him. In both forms, the boar seems to emerge from a female who incarnates into the Queen of Hell. Now, when I was reading the Caitlin Matthews the other week. There was in a number of the Grail romances, King Arthur stories, those different tales. There is often a representation of a goddess, like there are female characters that the hero meets along the way, and quite often they are maybe destructive is the one word, but they cause him a problem, or they're not good. They try and waylay him off his path, or they do something to cause him a problem. But in actual fact, although it could be seen as a negative thing, there is a positive reason for it, because it gives a trial that's something that the hero needs to go through to then achieve some sort of well, maybe rebirth, or just this idea of a ritual step. So by going through whatever sort of trial this goddess figure throws at him, this obviously is often connected with the idea of the goddess as a sort of crone or a dragon figure. And he goes through some sort of trial. He's thrown off his path, but in the long run, he needed to go through that, if you like, experience of the underworld, the negative, evil, maybe in inverted commas, the darker side. But it was a way of ritualistic way of getting to the other side, to get the Grail, to get to achieve the quest. So again, to me, this other idea, which maybe then from earlier legends, and which Shakespeare then took up and put it into his equations for his plays, which, as we know, shaped so much of our culture, certainly, and the mythological, fictional representations that have come ever since, right up to the present day. Again, it seems to be, well, I think Hughes will go with his book that in actual fact some of it is, again, eventually it can be seen as going through a positive if you go through all the plays. But maybe this idea of the goddess in her underworld aspect being a necessary evil that leads to progression. Perhaps in more recent times, it just, the negative was all that was stressed, and it wasn't. I guess it again. It mentioned before about the dealing with your shadow side and that sort of thing. I suppose that all comes to the same idea of going to the darkest place, the winter solstice, if you like, of the soul, but having something to then get you to the other side. And that's, as I say, what Tanishka was talking about, what we're missing in our society now, and have done for many years, because these empires have perverted and crushed what used to be these rituals that men needed in particular to get them through, to enable them to satisfactorily overcome this trip to the underworld, so they would come out the other side and be reborn, but in a more positive and stronger way. That's been lost now. But I mean, it got really messy with these rights that would that then got taken up and passed eventually. So that of these was around the Babylonian times and that sort of thing. But when they made their way to Rome, in the Roman Empire, and they got even darker, really. So Rome didn't apparently go for the Greek version of the Aphrodite myth, but got this cult from Phrygia, which is part of what's now Turkey, and I think again I mentioned that before. So their version of this same myth was Attis and Sibyl, and I think I've mentioned the goddess Sibyl before. So in Phrygia, which I just sort of we didn't properly go in that when I was doing my tour, but went near it. But this goddess Sibyl there was connected. The worship of her was connected to, again, what a meteorite stone, which was supposed to be revered and have power. So a lot of these are around powerful stones. I mean, these connect to Grail legends. In it's this idea of an object that has got incredible power. But I'm fascinated by so many often when it's supposed to be from a meteorite from the sky. So this version of the legend from Phrygia was adopted by Rome in 204 BC and spread about much of the empire until Christianity, when Rome adopted Christianity, and then they suppressed by partly absorbing in the 4th century CE. And I found it fascinating that Rome, the Roman Empire, I think it was when they were losing a battle or a war going on with Carthage at the time of Hannibal and his elephants and all that sort of thing. And it seemed quite incredible, but there was like an idea that their gods were failing them. The Roman gods, traditional Roman gods we think about, was failing them, so they needed to get a different divine protector, if you like, or divine inspiration. So they actually took this meteorite stone that was worshipped as part of this Sibyl worship in Phrygia, and they transported it to Rome. So that must have been around the time that they adopted this cult. And I think they did actually end up turning the battle around with Carthage. I'm not totally sure on the history of that one, but so again, you've got this idea in this legend where Attis, there's a ritual death. So in Rome, it was apparently celebrated the 22nd to the 26th of March. So obviously talking about springtime. On the first day, a pine tree trunk was carried with the effigy of Attis bound to it. On the third day, worshippers, in a frenzy, castrated themselves and hurled their amputated parts to an image of the goddess, which makes my eyes water. But again, you've got the idea of decapitated parts. And in some sort of weird version about fertility or something, although you're not obviously doing your fertility much good if you cut your parts off. Then on the 5th day, it was supposed to be that the god had risen. So there was this Saturnalian license. And on the 6th day, the goddess image with a black meteorite face, and maybe this goes into the idea of black Madonnas later on in history, were washed in a stream near the Tiber. And at the same time, initiates in a pit were washed under cascading blood of freshly slaughtered bulls, and emerged sinless and newborn, to be clothed and for some days fed as newborn babies. Sibyl's temple in Rome, where the rites were performed, was on the site of what's now St. Peter's Basilica, the Vatican Hill. So Resurrection Day was regarded as the day Sibyl conceived her new god. And this date, the nativity date, was the 25th of December. So again, and sometime I talked before when we had a chat last week about the Mind Unveiled, and I was reading the one he did about Christmas and all the dark ideas around Christmas and how that was potentially connected to the Templars, the Knights Templar, and how their infiltration of these different societies, religions, empires and how the sort of this cult of St. Nicholas that came into this different view of Christmas, how that was all tied in. But also you've got all these dark pagan myths, and I know a lot of paganism is very good, and like I say again, I think this is a paganism that was already empire, and it was already a corruption of what I think was these thousands and thousands of years ago, these Neolithic rituals of the goddess of the land and the charging of energy of the earth and the sky, and it connecting with the people. So 25th December was this nativity date for Sybil, when there was a birth of a new god, which in many regions the great goddess was already celebrated as birthday of a divine child. And Bethlehem, supposed to be the birthplace of Jesus, was a ritual center for other characters, which again was a different version of the same sort of myth, Tammuz and Astarte. So just as I say, it's interesting to me that there's so many legends of goddesses. Obviously we have the Mecca stone that was also worshipped by pagans, that became then obviously the holy site for Muslims. But this is me on my megalithomania tour, and this is in Hattusa, which is the capital of the Hittite Empire. Now again, this stone, which was in there, possibly what might have been, obviously there's just sort of the ruins of the base of the walls around there, but I think this might have been a temple complex. But apparently got this amazing green stone there, and I think this is again alleged to be from a meteorite. I don't know if it actually is or not. I think there were some geologists on our trip that didn't think it was likely to have been from meteorite, but it's an incredible, huge, striking green stone anyway. So I just thought I'd include that in there, because these whether you want to connect these ideas of gods coming from the sky and connect it with the ideas of, you know, the sort of being gods being alien figures or something like that, I don't know. But I mean it would stand to reason, obviously, if a meteorite did fall from the sky, to ancient people it would seem like it would seem like this is something from the gods that has come from the sky and come to the earth. So it would make perfect sense if that something like that had happened in a ball of flames and everything else, that this piece of rock would then be revered, and associated with the gods in the sky and sort of like some sort of cosmic power. And interestingly, although I think it's maybe only one, but it's quite a notable one. It's actually also within one of the Grail legends, Parsifal. I'm not sure you would pronounce it in this version, but by the German Wolfram von Eschenbach, a German troubadour knight. So again, the idea of these knights that were connected supposedly with holy orders and knights for Christianity, supposedly sort of fighting the good fight. I know it should be a misnomer really, but fighting for Jesus or whatever, but he was a German troubadour knight, and you have these Teutonic knights, which were the German version of the Knights Templar, and they went on their own sort of crusades at one point, they did convert places like Latvia, that were pagan, and converting them, killing them, converting them by the sword, and and I think into Poland, parts of Poland even. I think they got pushed back when they tried to get into Russia, but this idea of them trying to get a new sort of Christian empire, if you like, to the east. But in Parsifal, which was very influential for what's his name, Wagner. So he claimed that Christian de Torres, who obviously famous King Arthur legends, that was wrong, and he said the true source of the Grail was Oriental, words from the east. A Jewish astronomer named Vegetanis recorded the story from a foreign language, probably Arabic, in Toledo when it was under the Moorish rule. His identification of the Grail as a green stone fallen from the sky after a battle of Lucifer with the angels had close affinities with a source of the sacred Islamic black stone of Mecca, a meteorite said to have fallen from heaven and be the means of communication with God. So with that Mecca stone, the Quran states that I think Gabriel built this cubic shrine, the Kaaba, where it's kept. And Ibn Malik also told of a vision of Muhammad where he ascended skies and saw a green goblet of such penetrating brightness that all the seven heavens are illuminated by it. A voice declared to Muhammad, the all-highest God created this goblet for you, for your enlightenment. So both the divine stone and cup are important also in Islamic belief. And I mean, that description as well, I mean, will, again, seems to strike chords with things like Bellino and Paul Wallace again talk about, and this idea of ancient aliens, and, you know, the idea that a lot of gods in religions were, who knows, whether it was ancient alien figures or some sort of advanced ancient race. But, you know, again, that, you know, that description about a green goblet, you know, penetrating brightness, the sky is all illuminated by it, has maybe connotations people modern thinking would think, well, is that talking about a UFO of some sort? But yeah, so again, it's also intrinsic to the Islamic religion. Again, these ideas of a holy stone, particularly a meteorite stone, having some sacred divine power, and also the idea of a goblet or a chalice, a cup, some sort of receptacle, again holding, well, it's maybe some divine energy, or being the source of some power, and wielding it would confer some power on whoever's holding it, and something to be revered. So it, well, I'll maybe save my next bit for a bit later. But so sticking in the sort of Middle East region, again, these ancient legends. Sorry, this is a pictorial representation of the goddess Tiamat in Babylon. I was trying to look for images of Tiamat, and apparently it's a figure in Dungeons and Dragons now. So I was getting this umpteen sort of drawings of figures for Dungeons and Dragons and stuff. But this was a Syrian Babylonian creation myth. This Tiamat, I think, also known as like the I forget the term now, but the seas from which everything comes from. But she was also a goddess, and she was at war with the other gods, and she was fighting them all back and killing them and knocking them back, and they couldn't get on top of it until they sent this god Marduk, who was like a storm god, and he was able to finally destroy her. He burst her open by putting all these tempests into her mouth, burst her open, and then had, from the top half, made the heavens, the sky, and bottom half made the earth and everything in it except for man. Tiamat had like a viceroy, an assistant called Kingu, not Pingu, Kingu. He was sacrificed by Marduk, and his blood was used to make mankind. So again, the idea of sacred blood from the gods, and used in to create mankind. So again, this myth was taken by Jehovan Hebrew reformers to make their god a destroyer of the goddess, and they're sort of a conflict, if you like, a mythological conflict and a battle for the minds of people between Jehovah and the great goddess in 7th century BC Jerusalem. So Marduk was formerly the consort of the goddess. Kingu was this Adonis type. So the fact that Marduk sacrifices him, creates mankind out of his blood, it puts him in this lineage to the part performed later by Jesus Christ and Christ's blood. So this, again, this idea of a sacrificed God, and but within this myth, the idea of a sacrificed God connecting also with the destroyer of the goddess. And the Babylonian New Year festival was on the shortest day, so it's again a winter solstice connection. So there used to be, again, a sort of a gory ritual that they were fond of in those days, where the old king pretended to be killed and went in this tomb sort of sunset on the shortest day, and then there was a young substitute standing in for the king, bless him, and he got to marry the queen, and he was, I guess, given king for a day, until the sunset of the following day, when he was ripped apart by tracked by wild horses, or apparently one time he was ripped apart by women who were dressed as horses. So he got ripped apart, dismembered. So he became the sacrifice, standing in for the king himself. So the king himself just had to, pretend to be dead. Some poor got privilege for a day and then got ripped to pieces. But again, this is idea of enacting a ritual sacrifice and then rebirth, which was supposed to rejuvenate the land, if you like. And so on the third day, the king would come out of his tomb. He'd become born again. He'd gone to the underworld, and now he'd risen again. And so he was reigning after the death of the goddess consort. So again, this is all connected around the winter solstice and the idea of the time when nature, the earth, is sort of having going through a death, going through the underworld, going through the period of darkness. And so the need for these rituals to come out the other side, if you like, or to regrow the land, to regenerate the land. But again, it's this concept with these states where they're, like I said, the ancient Grail rituals were about blood, but it was about the natural blood produced by women in the menstrual cycle. It wasn't about blood of people being ripped to pieces and killed and chopped up. So again, it was perversions and tainting of the ancient rituals, and it was something that was making it all about blood and guts, murder, killing, conflict, battle, this physical power. And it was, again, it was against the feminine. It was like it was in conflict with the goddess. It wasn't having a relationship with goddess, maybe a trial, being thrown something nasty to deal with, being dragged through the underworld but coming through it the other side. It was about chopping up some poor sap, or many poor saps, and getting blood on the land in that way. It was about ritual bloodletting. But as I say, how Tanishka describes it anyway, and to me, it makes a lot of sense that it was. And I'm not going to pass over the fact that quite possibly there was sacrifice in Neolithic times. Apparently, there's a lot of evidence for that. So, I guess I shouldn't try and pretend that Neolithic people didn't actually do any of that. But it definitely seems to that it was made into a more militaristic thing in these sort of later centuries, around maybe the few hundred years BC, early years AD, as they used to call it. They call it CE now, don't they? Common Era. But it seems to be a tendency of making, and as you get this going on now into the night, through this history going on to the Knights Templar, it's all about ritual in terms of the sword, and it's about competitiveness and striving to defeat the other armies to gain an upper hand. So let me just skip on a little bit. So as I say, in the old days, the Yuletide, the Celtic winter solstice, was about meeting with the dragon. So again, often this crone aspect of the goddess was connected with the dragon, and it was symbolizing also man's dark side. But in the old rituals, this annual initiation was the holiest of holies, demanding a humbling of the male ego through confrontation with their greatest fears. And the local Magdalene, which was the sort of priestess, presided over this sacred rite. And the high priestess taught the Grail mysteries so men and women can ensure that they lived the right relationship with themselves and others and the earth. Men would take vows to serve the Earth Mother in the circle of life, and only after man wedded himself to the earth, the original rite of matrimony, then they were considered mature enough to have a sacred union with a woman. And women in general are a microcosm of the Earth Mother. So hence, again, when you move up to sort of Grail legends, and I'm going to mention briefly a bit later as well, like St. George, obviously connected with the Crusaders, and again to the Knights Templar. These tales of kings sending potential suitors, knights, to slay a dragon. In the past, again, it was a symbolic thing about overcoming your greatest fears, reaching a different stage of manhood, a stage of life where you come through trials and you reach a better understanding of yourself, and how to deal with the world. As Tanishka says, now it's all about sort of sports, competitive combat, like a symbolic ritualized combat with competitive sports. The World Cup, you have a Grail, you have again, a sort of symbolic winning of this power symbol. And blood, the blood sacrifice is all about inflicting wounds. And even when you get into the story about Jesus on the cross, again, this connection, as I said about the fisher king, you had the wounded king, and the symbology of a bleeding lance. And again, this is transposed with the Christian story of Jesus on the cross. And there's a story of, I think, of one of the Roman legionnaires piercing his side with a spear or something like that. So again, it's repeating the same symbolic steps for all these different periods in history, different places, different empires, different religions. So in obviously, eventually, the Roman Empire took Christianity on to say that it was their state religion, if you like. So again, Christianity then it became the place of. It became a myth that empowered empire. In 392 CE, the Roman Empire passed legislation to outlaw all forms of earth-based worship, and those who dared to keep practicing it were tortured and killed. So this persecution of mystic women started long before the European witch hunts that were many years later, but again was this idea of, I suppose, you could say these witch hunts, these women that were accused of being witches, it was all part, they were representing this early, if you want to say Neolithic, but this early idea of the goddess. So by persecuting them, hunting them down, torturing them, killing them, it was again all about this idea of usurping the divine, the sacred goddess figure, to install this empire version of, I'll say patriarchy, but I'm not using it in the same terms as a sort of a wokey, but this idea of empire usurping what's the natural feminine side of humanity and the world. So there's Tanishka quotes a Hopi Native American prophecy: when the women give their blood back to the earth, men will come home from war and earth shall find peace. So that's quite a good one. I just sort of thought it was as an aside where I mentioned when I went to the Glastonbury Symposium, and there was talk by Paulden Jenkins. He may be familiar to other people here. People at the conference knew him very well. He'd been going there for years, and I think he'd actually been part of the organisation of it at some stage. But he'd been rather poorly, ill health and cancer. But yeah, seemed a very interesting guy. He'd been involved with lots of sort of, I suppose, what you call esoteric things over the years. But also, had spent a lot of time in Palestine, helping the Palestinians. But he was saying, and he said he didn't want to be misunderstood in this way. He wasn't trying to say that this should happen, but he was saying that the blood sacrifice of the Palestinians in what's been going on would somehow help the world, and this idea of there being all this giving blood to the world, if you like, into the land, the land of the earth, not just the particular place where they are, would be somehow a positive, or I suppose be one of these dark trials of the underworld, and it would be something that would be regenerative eventually for humanity. I mean, I would hope that was the case. Dreadful thing to think that it has to happen, but I suppose that could tie in with this, how these ideas of there being sacrifice, and it's part of a ritual rebirth to move to a different stage of life. So maybe life of humanity. I mean, I would say it seems like to me, a lot of the bad people on doing things to our planet and our world, our society, they want the blood sacrifice, but for a truly negative reason. They think they need it to get to go the step to get their side of the agenda to, well, whether it's some sort of apocalypse, Armageddon, to get to some sort of promised land that they deludedly, I think, see on the other side, but they see they need to get to precipitate this, and they're doing it for that reason. But again, that's maybe two sides of how to view sacrifice, whether it's something tragically happens, but then through it you can make it into a positive and grow from it, to regrow, be reborn. Or it can just be something that is literally destructive and is all about just oppressing and moving on to a dark side and perpetuating that darkness. And that's, I guess, the crux of where we are. So yes, so much now, but from centuries before, it was this idea of, like I said before, Maria, we were talking about maybe the origins of the idea of having saintly relics, like bones of saints. Maybe that's stretched back to these idea of like keeping these bones of women who were revered or something like that to keep for maybe hundreds of years, and then moving around the land and maybe sort of energize or mark certain places at different times. You know, and these sort of relics became, or even just the possibility or the myth potentially of relics having a connection to certain hope. You know, in going back to Glastonbury Abbey, they you know, it was considered for one time as the cradle of Christianity in England, which is maybe why it was particularly, you know, jumped on and destroyed when, you know, Henry VIII, you know, just dissolved things and made the Church of England, and it was needed to be made an example of because its particular power. But say what the Dunning book was saying that the where are we going? There we go. Other monasteries to attract support, but Glastonbury chose Arthur, and there was a skeleton of there was a skeleton found, and it was said to be of Arthur. Apparently a large skeleton, so maybe that ties in with the idea of sort of giant figures, or, you know, larger than normal people. But Glastonbury allied itself with this idea of the legends of the Grail, and this combination kept the abbey at the forefront of English monasticism until the dissolution. So this idea of power through relics, power through some connection with the dead, physical body parts, bones, skulls, but that became something that became ossified. It wasn't something that was, as I say, mutable with these parts of these women that were moved about, maybe ground into powder that was used in cups, in rituals. But in this age, it was already come something where it was like something to be revered, and something that a big monastery, a bastion of this established religion that was part of the power of the state. These things all became just symbols and links to power and battles between different, whether it's monasteries, kingdoms, countries, and they just want to use it for their power. think this quote was very, I think this again was from the Dunning book. The concept of a sleeping king who lies ready to save his people at the hour of their greatest danger fulfills the need for certainty in an uncertain world. Claims of his dormant presence in places as far apart as the coast of Norway and the Celtic fringes of France, the heroic, sleeping or not, must never be allowed to die. It is a spirit of the nation. So, yeah, I guess people need these myths in some ways to keep them going. But of course, where we get the danger is if you get caught up with the myths and want the savior, whatever that may be, whether it's Christ, Arthur, or this try and gain this Grail, this object, mythical, but people believe, oh, you know, they can find it. They can find this Grail. It exists. They need to find it. And if they find it, then that's going to solve all the problems. Then they're going to be rich. They're going to be king. The land will be great. But again, it's this distracting, taking away from the idea that we all need to have our personal journey and transformation. And that's the thing that's been lost. And it's this disconnection, as I say before, it was the king ruled, but he ruled because of the wisdom and the guidance of the priestess. So it was the masculine, feminine idea in harmony. And without the balance where the feminine, the priestess, the goddess has been destroyed, exiled, rejected, then just only having this masculine aspect, and then that just becomes about pursuit of power and for the people themselves, you know, those few people in power to the detriment of everyone else. So another quote: any king who falls out of harmony, and this I think is from Caitlin Matthews, any king who falls out of harmony with his land and its people is likewise out of harmony with sovereignty. And as I say, sovereignty in terms of this goddess of the land figure, who hides her fair face and assumes the garment of wasteland, a major theme of Grail literature. Not to go into it now, but I haven't read it for a while, but T.S. Eliot's poem The Wasteland is all about, again, this idea of the land, society going bad, and talks about the legend of the Fisher King with that. Now, it's sort of, again, I say this is all, it seems so synchronous as I've been going through doing my research for the different talks, but also places that I've been drawn to travel to this year. And I would sort of refer back to the trip from Turkey. And I started reading, again, this book, The Sword and the Grail, Andrew Sinclair, who I don't think he mentions explicitly, but his name Sinclair, the name Sinclair comes from St. Clair, which was, I'll go into in a minute, but this Sword and the Grail about the Templars and around Boston Chapel and all these sort of ideas. Again, I started reading about that and I was blown away by all the constant talk about the Orkneys. Again, another place that I was drawn to go to this year, and seemingly couldn't be further away in many ways from Turkey. But again, all these connections, and that there's a character in some of the Grail myths called Loth, L-O-T-H, or a character in a lot of the Celtic tradition. He is called the King of Lothian and Norway in Geoffrey, while in the Percival of Tretton de Troyes, he's called the King of Orkney, an appellation which continues into later tradition. Lothian is an area above Hadrian's Wall between Galloway and Gore in Arthurian legend. Mythically, Norway is known as Lochlan in Celtic tradition, literally the land overseas, and it's associated with the land of the dead. Orkney itself has accumulated much of the same reputation, both from its association with the classical name for Hades, Orcus, and an Aboriginal tradition concerning the burial of the dead upon Orkney. Now, yeah, certainly I showed pictures before my talk about the Orkney trip and the numbers of these the burial chambers there. But I was fascinated with this idea that the Orkneys themselves could have been known as sort of as like a Hades, like an underworld. And I was wondering the time when like Andrew Collins mentioned that this altar stone in Stonehenge had been found. Well, it's been proven to be of stone, Orcadian stone, which can be just of from that area around the Orkneys, but also the top of the mainland of Scotland. Now, Andrew was convinced that it would be from the Orkneys, and it did seem to make sense because of all the notable stone circles up there. Of course, the Ring of Bogar. Apparently, I've sort of read recently there'd been another geological. Can't remember the word. Can't think of the word. But another test of the stone, and they said it was different stone to the type at the Ring of Bogar and the other megalithic sites on the Orkneys. So they didn't think from that it was from the Orkneys. Now, my friend Pete mentioned he had a conversation with Maria Wheatley, and she thought it was from Aberdeenshire, the stone. I don't know what the background of her knowledge of that is. So, but seems potentially it's not the Orkneys, but still the topmost mainland of Scotland, so still far north. But I don't know, it just struck me maybe that somehow the significance of bringing it all that way, I mean, whether it's from the Orkneys or the very top of the mainland, it's still come the length of the what's now the British Isles to get to be brought down to be in the centre of Stonehenge. I don't know, and it just made me think this when I read this about the connection of Orkneys with the dead. You know, was it in the rituals of these Neolithic times? Was it something like they revered the Orkneys as if it was the underworld? You know, but I suppose so far away. It's the darker part. You know, in the talking about going in the winter solstice, obviously in the far north, the shortest day is even shorter. You know, so and from, Andrew Collins' talk at the symposium again when he mentioned it this year when I was there. So again, I'm like, wow, all these connections. He's talking about the Orkneys. I was about to go at that time. But he was talking about these grooved ware people, which I still think should be a band in the 80s, but how they come across. And it was this migration of these people from Siberia. And I talked with my Andrew Collins, talk about Andrew Collins and the Cygnus Key book. This idea that people had migrated from what's now Siberia, and they have maybe brought, maybe also connected somehow with these Denisovans, these potentially sort of almost autistic savant type, but ancient peoples. But anyway, some would have come down into what is now Turkey and into the Middle East, sort of south of the Caucasus Mountains. But another set of the people would have come across the top and went into what's now sort of Northern Europe, and then they went across to the Orkney Islands, and then made their way in time down through the main end of the British Isles, and it was basically the same people years later that made their ways down to the south of what's now England and built the amazing sites that lucky enough to have not far from me, you know, like Avebury and Stonehenge, Stanton Drew. I don't know what the time period would have been for them to come down from the Orkneys to the south of England. I imagine it would have taken some length of time. So perhaps, I don't know, in this became associated in legend as this obviously a place of power and revered with the amazing megalithic sites that they have on the Orkneys that I talked about and showed pictures of on my talk then. So some, you know, was the Orkstone, it was something about connecting with their past, their ancestry that came from the Orkneys, but also more, it had some mythic power. Like I say, is it something like it was like a representation of the underworld, maybe in the center of the circle? I don't know, but that does caught my eye when I read that. And just another mention of the Orkneys. Now, what I wasn't expecting, as I was reading this book about the Sword and the Grail, around the Templars and how they became into the Freemasons, was that the connection between the St. Clair family. This is Prince Henry St. Clair. I think potentially that might be from Rosslyn Chapel, but I think obviously some engraving of his head. So he was the first Earl of Orkney, and was held to be buried in the crypt at Rosslyn Chapel, possessor of Orkney and the Shetlands, and he owed allegiance to Norway as well as Scotland. Now he's the prince that's alleged to have gone on this expedition to what's now North America. We talked a bit about that last week. Might not have time to go into much more detail about that tonight, but it's fascinating again, this idea of them setting sail from the Orkneys, potentially with these two brothers who were sailors from Venice, and that's another connection with a place of power in these sort of empires and that were growing up in those sort of Middle Ages and onwards. These black nobility, lots of these sort of ruling families that have continued their influence again, like so many other of these sort of bloodlines. But how they connected with what's been called the New World, and apparently the first use of the term the New World was in this this thing called the Zeno narrative, which is supposedly from letters written back by one of these Venetian sailors who went up to the Orkney Islands. And Andrew Sinclair, the author of the book, was saying, I think within this narrative it talks about how he just wanted to explore the world, but he was saying they were trying to, it makes sense to say that the Venetians were trying to maybe open up different trade routes with like the north, the Baltic states, Scandinavia, lots of sort of fur trade and various things there, and trying open up different trade routes there. And as I say, then they went to North America. So it doesn't seem too unbelievable a story when considered that it's been proved that the Vikings went there, and I think that would have been about 200 years earlier. So it's not exactly that it seems that unbelievable, really, that they would have done there. But and it sort of mentioned in the book that, as I said before, the Teutonic Knights, the German version of the Knights Templar, were trying to do a sort of crusade to the east, to countries like Latvia, what sort of now Eastern Europe, places that were still pagan, and they were conquering them and converting them by the sword. So maybe the Templars were looking for an empire in the west, because this was after the Templars had their moment of after a couple of 100 years of great power and wealth, and they were because they sort of annoyed the Pope and the King of France of the day, who was getting jealous of their power, and so they got accused of various things which may or may not be true. There was heresies and rituals, probably some of which was true, but again, it was sort of a power grab. But the Templars were disbanded, the leaders were burnt and tortured and killed. So it's saying a number of the Templars escaped to Scotland. Is it Robert the Bruce who defeated the English at Bannockburn? And I think the Sinclair family helped in that. And because Bruce, I think he'd killed a rival, and he'd done it on at some, like in a church or in a religious site. He was excommunicated by the Pope at the time. So because of that, he was sort of prepared to let some of these Templars in and gave them sanctuary. So it was all sort of unofficial, and they were given lands. So it sort of from that time, it became this place where the growing influence of the Knights Templar, although they weren't officially called that, and they got given sort of other names, and that's where it sort of morphed into the Scottish Rite Freemasonry. As we know, Rosslyn Chapel is a sort of important centre for that, and obviously, well, I say obviously, I haven't actually read it myself, but the Da Vinci Code made it famous as being this, again, tied in with these idea of Grail legends. Now that's the apprentice pillar, which has got all these interesting connotations. I think one of the legends is that they're the Grail, or the Grail within the pillar. But I mean, the pillar itself is fascinating. Obviously, so much of the Rosslyn Chapel, all the decorations, the engravings, is pagan and Masonic as well as Christian. And Sinclair was talking about how the pillar is representing Yggdrasil, obviously the Norse legend, the tree of life. As there's a serpent tail, serpent with a tail in its mouth, so representing Lucifer. All these connections of this secret wisdom of the Cathars and the Templars, but all these connections with Nordic myth. Although there's 4 strands of stone that twisted as ivy about it, probably a link to the 4 Gospels, but I think I wasn't expecting, I didn't realise, I was sort of moaning when I was doing my talk about my trip to Orkney, and I was saying I was interested in the Viking connections with the Orkney Islands. But the ruins that I did see that were connected to the Vikings, it was already Christianized, and cathedrals, and places of churches, and and I was a bit disgruntled that it was sort of not they'd already lost the sort of Norse legends, or certainly in terms of what physically remained of the. But again, like I said before, you sort of forget the extent of the Viking influence, and the fact that the Vikings, the Normans in France, were Vikings. The Normans that would, William the Conqueror, that were the last invaders to conquer England. These again were Norse descendant people, and these Sinclairs that built Rosslyn Chapel, William Sinclair. Well, there were several William Sinclairs, but one of which had this Rosslyn Chapel built. But they were from Normans descent, but Vikings, so they had Norse heritage, via the Normans. So, and they were, as I say, the first Earls of Orkney. And there's a time so the Orkney Islands had this sort of almost dual status, where for a lot of time, because of it was Viking, so it was connected with the kings of Norway and various sort of to and fro, where they had these earls that were officially under the kings of Norway and the other Norse kings of Scandinavia, but all the connections with Scotland as well, and obviously it eventually became part of what modern day Scotland. But this Sinclair family over different years were Earls of Orkney, but also had Rosslyn Chapel, and they had all these royal positions and important positions in terms of defending Scotland. But as I say, they were Templar Knights basically, and again became the Grand Masters of the Freemasonry in Scotland, as the Templars basically morphed into the Freemasons and carried in with so many of the rituals, knowledge, practices. But this apprentice pillar has got all sorts of other connections with it, and it again sort of ties in with some of what we were talking about, these ideas of ritual, sacrifice, and blood and gore, I suppose. So the legend around the apprentice pillar, that the master mason in charge of constructing the chapel went away, and while he was away, this apprentice designed and had fashioned this amazing pillar. And when the master came back, he was so enraged that this apprentice had made this thing and showed him up while he was away, that he hit him over the head and instantly killed the apprentice. So there's that legend, but then that connects to the legend of the master builder Hiram of the first temple of Solomon in Jerusalem. And again, there's a legend there where he was killed, I think, with a blow to the head. And he wouldn't divulge the secrets of how the temple was made to the people that invaded. Is it Nebuchadnezzar? But he supposedly retained these secrets, and so now he's revered, and now into the Freemasonry rituals. Hiram is he's one of the prime architects, if you like, that's revered as sort of one of the pillars of Freemasonry. But this idea about these legends sort of repeating. So, and again, this sort of idea of a blow to the head and a sacrifice, and being just into the side, the secret he didn't want to divulge was there's supposed to be this thing Shamir, which some legends said was like a creature, described like a worm, and others like a substance, but it was supposed to be something that cut through stone, it cut through any material. This idea that Solomon's temple, because it was a holy place, it couldn't be constructed with any tools that could be used for war, for killing. So they used this Shamir that would cut through anything, and that was supposedly the secret of what this was, or where it was, how to get it, was something that Hiram withheld. So I guess again you've got this concept of ancient knowledge being withheld, which is, I guess, something that pervades the secret societies. But interestingly as well, again, like I say, I was moaning about it, but when I was in the Orkney Islands, and I went to just as an afterthought really, on my last day, before when I was waiting for the ferry, went to the St Magnus Cathedral, which is a really striking medieval cathedral. And I was thinking that maybe there's some similarities with Rosslyn Chapel, but St Magnus was, if you like, a Norse saint, obviously when the Vikings had been converted to Christianity. But again, the story that he was killed, and it was this rival that killed him with a blow to the head. So that was like a reenactment of this murder of Hiram, this Temple of Solomon master mason. And again, the legend of the killing of the apprentice who built the pillar in Rosslyn Chapel, again, is the same repeating. So again, the Sinclairs, who were the first earls of the Orkneys, would be all aware of this legend and of St Magnus. So I don't know. Again, there's resonances there, but it's just sort of a little bit funny and synchronous to me that I was there and sort of saw these in afterthought and was like, oh yeah, it's quite impressive. I'm not here for that. I was here for the stone circles. But all this does just make me think again that there was it wasn't just a coincidence that these Sinclairs, who were so important in terms of the Templars, Freemasons, their connection with royalty, somehow it doesn't seem a coincidence to me that they were in the Orkneys. Somehow, maybe again, it's because it was a place of Neolithic, from Neolithic times, a place of power and ritual, and it was that there was some secret knowledge that they had, or that it was communicated, that meant that they wanted to they made it a place that they had, and somehow a connection there. Obviously they had this knowledge that they put into Rosslyn Chapel, and maybe this part of the hidden knowledge was also that they knew something about the Orkneys and they wanted to tap into that. I mean, there will also be, of course, it's in a strategic spot, the Orkneys, the north of the British Isles, between, you know, where Scandinavia, and then you can go the other way to Greenland, and then across, as they did, I think, probably to what's now North America. So it had strategic, materially obvious reasons why people would want to be there and covet it. But I think when you go back to those incredible stone circles and that sort of thing, and the burial chambers, I think there's something more about that place. And I think centuries later, it seems that there's a reason why the Sinclairs are connected so intrinsically with the Orkneys as well as Rosslyn Chapel. Just as we're talking about bones, that's one of many of the sort of tombstones or engravings along the side of St Magnus Cathedral. So just again, you've got a lot of these sort of skeleton figures and skull and bones along the way, to seem to fit in with the theme of what we were talking about. And again, I stumbled upon the remains of this palace that are just opposite the cathedral. This round sort of style was very much what the Templars took from their time in the, you know, what's now the Middle East, the Holy Land. They absorbed so much of the influences of Islamic architects, the Islamic world, though they went there in the Crusades supposedly initially to, you know, defeat, and they did obviously kill a lot of Muslim people when they first took Jerusalem back, but then they ended up losing it. But they did for a long time have good relationship with a lot of Muslims, and they were also sort of trading off power struggles between different Muslim factions in order to keep their position in the Holy Land. But a lot of the Templars growing of their power was partly from taking on a lot of these ideas, and again, as I say, probably knowledge, including of architecture from the Islamic world. But again, I just stumbled across this place, and there's sort of a bishop's palace, which is later, sort of a bit further on there. But I was like, wow, these are quite striking ruins and stuff. And it's, again, I just stumbled upon it, but then I found out there's all these connections with the Templars and with the Crusaders, and all that world of winning power, which again obviously had their connection. A lot of the later Grail legends, the knight figures who were, you know, if you like, the King Arthur and the Round Table, they were presented as being Templar knights. So they got subsumed into those stories. And as I mentioned in my alchemy talks, they also potentially, a lot of these ballads, in the south of France and the troubadour tradition, and a lot of these, if you like, rituals and things may have just been woven into a lot of these stories as a way of hiding it. And again, that was talking then about sort of secrets of alchemy, esoterics. So basically that's one and the same thing, I think, as the Grail. You know, these are legends about, well, they're both, but funny enough, I suppose they're both talked about in the same way in modern terminology. If people say, oh, someone's seeking the Holy Grail, it's like it's some never to be found object. And alchemy, same way. I was like, yeah, they want to try and find alchemy. They want to try and, you know, make lead into gold. They're looking for some impossible dream. But I think basically these things are just all about what yourself and ritual journeys within yourself. But again, you know, it's this idea of esoteric knowledge got woven into these Grail legends. So basically it's all, it's again, alchemy was all about transformation. And a lot of it, again, it's really about transformation of the soul rather than the focus with so many people's ideas it's about transforming metals, base metal into gold. But again, that's making things into a material, a source of power and wealth, rather than an actual spiritual or emotional transformation. So yeah, the crest of this Prince Henry of Orkney was the dragon or serpent of wisdom. Showed the Norse great orm or worm with the coronet of a Prince of Orkney round its neck, above a knight's helmet, and the Sinclair silver shield with its black and grailed cross. Suggested his family was the bearer of ancient wisdom, which was repeated in the design of the apprentice pillar. So again, the ancient legends of dragons and serpents, and how, you know, these all connect to the goddess. There was a greater sea palace at Kirkwall, this capital of the Orkneys, where this picture was taken, but that was destroyed years ago. But that was apparently designed like the Templars palace or castle in Haifa, now in Israel. So again, as I say, it was this architecture from the Holy Land, from that side. They took these ideas and they put it in the Orkneys and other parts of Britain and Europe, and it really just seemed it's like I was saying about the people coming from Asia and like going in two different directions, one to south towards, you know, Turkey, Middle East, other northern Europe, then Orkneys, and then down through the British Isles. It was such a, when this had the Crusades, and they went to the people from Britain and Western Europe, and then they were coming down back into to the Holy Land, and then they taking a lot of the ideas again from the people there. It seemed like it was going full circle, and then transmitting back these ideas, you know, so from thousands and thousands of years back, these the same origin people, but going on slightly different paths, but a lot of the legends and rituals very similar, but then they sort of maybe morphed into slightly different ways, then they merged again. Just really fascinating ebbs and flows of thousands of years of history. But I don't I don't know how people are doing in there. I apologies, I can't keep up with the chat as well as doing my rambling, but yeah, it fascinates me, the connection, the Templars, how they evolved. You know, a couple of hundred years they had this enormous power. They took a lot of ideas. Apparently, as I say, they did, although they were supposed to be in complete antithesis to the Muslims, who obviously they went there to kick out of the Holy Land. The Ismaili assassins, the origin of where the word assassin comes from, they did a lot of deals, and they exchanged a lot of knowledge with the Templars, this sort of sect of Islam, but not really. They had like initiates, and they were sort of taught that Islam itself was just, you paid lip service to these real Islamic codes, but there was this particular codes that belonged to them, and they had these you know, they had to follow that. You had to go through these sort of initiation ceremonies, and they followed this leader. Young men were like trained in arms, then drugged, taken to this garden, and give all these luxuries and women, and they were told that basically that they were in paradise, and because of their leader. And then they were taken back to the court, you know, sort of drugged again, taken back to the court. So they thought they'd basically been to paradise. And then they would do anything for this old man, as he was called, the Sheikh of the Mountain. So the term Fedayeen is still used for Islamic guerrillas. So they had all these, you know, ways of fighting. They would, you know, be great warriors, and they would go out and be sent out to murder people, bump off, you know. So that's, as I say, where the origins of the word assassins. But the Templars, you know, got a lot of the ideas of their organization, of this, of their sort of secret society, if you like, and their techniques of, you know, underhand combat and bumping people off. But I think it's, you know, the possible origins of the, you know, the sort of the MK Ultra ideas. I say these men were like drugged, you know, convinced that they were in paradise. Lots of, you know, young women around. They were so, right, you know, you've got all these, you're like Superman, and you're going to paradise, and you're getting all these amazing rewards. And then they would do absolutely anything. They would obviously kill. They would be prepared to die for their leader, because they thought they were going to go back to this paradise. And had just had a thought then, you know, as you know, the Manson family, and this idea then, you know, people being drugged, and he had all these young women around, people would be seduced, and they would go out and kill for him. It just, you know, it's this sort of Templar 8 that persevered again, became a way of ritualistically enforcing power. And again, there's various sort of different places that become connected up with the legends. Different, you've got the idea of a Grail castle, where where the Grail is hidden, and the knights have to try and find it there, and it's where all the power is, if you like. And apparently the castle where these assassins were holed up, that was, you know, one place where, you know, in certain legends it got talked about like a Grail castle, this place where it's got like somehow mythic place of power and secret knowledge. The founder of the Templars, Hugh de Payens, knew of the assassins when he formed it. Christian and Muslim military orders were aware of each other in Syria before 1128, when the Templar rule was written. So this was after the Crusades. Templars sort of came out of that. Colours were the same. The assassin Rafiqs wore red caps and belts, white tunics, this red and white. Obviously the Templars were known for white tunics with the red cross. So as I say, you know, it was, and apparently this Ismaili that's considered a prophet next after Muhammad by these assassins, and often in these Ismaili texts there was an obsessed wanderer, like a Percival character in the Quest of the Grail. But yeah, so there were obviously to and fro in the Crusades. The Templars cooperated with assassins, other Islamists. Saladin from what's now Turkey, he messed things up for him. He took back Jerusalem and united these Muslim factions, so they were able to drive out the Templars and the Crusaders. I don't think they ever got Jerusalem back. The Third Crusade came closest with Richard I, Lionheart. But so they lost Jerusalem, but it was supposed to be about just a holy crusade to get the Holy Land back. But obviously it became more and more about the Templars reinforcing their power, going back, getting these fortresses around the coast, around the Mediterranean. They became the first bankers, even when it was supposed to be against the Christian religion at that time, usury. But they got all this power and wealth, and you know, possibly a lot of that was through potentially getting things from the temple. I mean, there's legends that they got the Grail from what was Solomon's temple, but maybe it was more than anything else, it was knowledge, and I'm sure no small amount of material wealth as well. So they got all this increasing power within Europe. Now it's interesting their connection as well with the Cathars. That's the ruins of the Montsegur, where the Cathars had their sort of final stand. Now so the Templars incorporated a lot of this in Kabbalah, but also they had a lot of connections with the Cathars in the south of France. Cathars had this sort of sect of Christianity, believed the flesh was corrupt, life and ascension to spirit, rather like a quest for the Grail, but it was about the spirit, and that Lucifer or the devil brought about the creation of man. So the Cathars had a mystical feast known as the Manis Sola, a chaste kiss of reception into faith called the Consolamentum. The perfecti took initiates into the path of the spirit, more pure and personal maybe than Catholicism. The individual was made responsible for his own soul by an ascetic life. Cathar influences were evident in the quest for the Grail in this early crusading quest for this holy city of Jerusalem. But then it all got turned around very nastily, and it's like much later on there was, I'm not sure what number they was up to now, but there was actually termed another crusade, but it was actually just within Europe, and again, one of these power struggle things, that it was decided that, you know, the Pope at the time, that these Cathars, they were heretics. So there was a crusade within European soil, and these Cathars were wiped out, and that was their final siege of this castle Montsegur. And then finally the last remaining people went, you know, gave up, and they were burned at the stake, and terrible atrocities happened. So it was interesting. It sort of again, this was another castle which got mixed up with some legend as being like a Grail castle, and maybe having, because the Perfecti had, it was a sort of a spiritual place of food and life. There was a chalice used at this ritual ceremony they used to have, which was said to have been smuggled out and buried in caves below the fortress. So again, you've got these ideas of some sort of receptacle of some kind that has some mystical or spiritual power. But the relationship with the Templars and the Cathars is, apparently some were involved with the crusade to kill them, but as I say, they had others, you know, there was great influence of the Cathar religion within the Templars. So yeah, some joined the crusade against the Cathars, but most Cathar knights escaped slaughter were received into the military order of the Temple of Solomon, which was back in the Middle East. So as I say, the same fate would eventually go to the Templars as well, where they would be, it was decided that they were too powerful, and the Pope and the King at the time, you know, lent this sort of battle against them, if you like, and the leaders were burned at the stake, having been tortured and confessing to various crimes, you know. But a lot of these sort of ritual ideas which they were supposed to have done maybe permeated into the Freemasonry. But as it says here, the fall of the Templars and flight of some knights with treasure supposedly, and their fleet to Scotland, like I say, were to change the fortunes of old Norse and Norman Scottish family of the St. Clairs. This disaster of the Templar Order was an opportunity for the Lords of Rosslyn. They ingested Templar resources and skills, and they led the remaining knights into battle to win the independence of Scotland. So that's sort of, and then they claimed the Orkneys and the Shetlands and established a colony in a new world, potentially, if they did get across the ocean to North America. So the sort of the origins of the name, the Sinclair family, it was the Moor family of Vikings and Normans. So St. Clair, I think there's this region in France, in Normandy, it means holy light, Sanctus Clarus, holy sainted clarity or shining light. So the Moor family controlled some of coastal Norway, in the Orcadian Isles, and Caithness. Founder Earl Rognvald, one son of Torf Einar, took over the Orcadian Isles, became the father of Thorfinn the First. And I remember reading about him when I was in the Orkneys. He was a legendary Viking leader. And another Rognvald's son was Rolf the Ganger, or Rollo to the French, and he was outlawed by the King of Norway, took a marauding expedition down the North Sea and conquered Brittany, and ended up having this region of Normandy. So they became the Normans. So the Normans are Vikings. There was a saint. There was a Saint Clair that gave his name to this place, which then the family took the name from there. And he was a Scotsman, William, and that was a Christian name which a lot of the Lords of Rosslyn later took as well. And he lived in the beginning of the 7th century in a in a cell, you know, like a little room near a well. So there's a lot of connections with holy waters in the land. These waters were said to cure eye disease, and healing wells became associated with St Clair. And there were some in Scotland as well, near the area of Rosslyn Chapel. But again, you've got this connection in legends with the blood of certain sort of revered people, saintly people connected with these healing waters. So this saint was beheaded. So again, we've got a decapitated, we've got someone losing their head. He was beheaded for condemning the sins of a local lady. And the well is still there by the River Epte. And it's there's a statue of St Clair by this river, holding his head in the palm of his hands. His cult was widespread in Normandy because of other St Clairs who evangelized France from the south and across the Epte. So the Moor cousins who left to guard the borders against French attack from Paris took the name St Clair and built a castle with a round keep. Again, this idea of a round keep, which is something sort of connected with the templars, which they brought from the Middle East, the Muslim world, which had that sort of architecture. So again, there's this sort of connection of there's healing wells, which but yeah, the decapitated head, can't get away from decapitated heads. And one of the things that the Templars were accused of doing, and I think there is physical evidence for this, that they sort of worshipped or had heads, skulls, in various of their temples that they used to worship or revere. Potentially, you know, that might have been where the skull and crossbones for the pirate flags and all that comes through. But you know, this might be connected to the legends about the teraphim, which is in the Hebrew Bible. And again, there's conjecture as to what these teraphim were, whether they were just sort of idols that people used to keep in their houses or take around with them, and some sort of representation of ancestors. But also potentially these were heads or skulls. There's a reference of in the Bible to, I think it's Rachel, during Rachel and Jacob's escape from Laban, with Michael's haphazard assistance of David fleeing Saul, and as the object of desire in the narrative of Micah's idol. Sorry, I've rambled off a long tangent there. So in Genesis 31, when her husband Jacob escapes, Rachel takes a teraphim belonging to her father Laban and hides them on a camel's saddle. When Laban comes looking for them, she sits on them and claims that she cannot get up because she is in the women's way. So, i.e., she's menstruating. From this, it can be deduced that the teraphim was small. I thought that was interesting again, though, because going back to the old Tanishka talking about how the Grail legends were around the women's cycles, menstruation, and Grail, there was it was blood of the menstrual cycle. So there was a little bit of a connection there, I thought maybe. But in a number of places, in Jericho, for instance, like the oldest city, that's where this plastered skull. So again, they were saying that these were cultic objects that were sort of used in rituals, maybe. Now, I did write a little bit about this in my book, The Lost Child, because I was reading about this like psychologist who was pre-Freud, and talking about the uncanny being the dark side of the imagination. And there was discussion of the presence in 19th century culture of images of the uncanny linked not only to the figure of the child, but more specifically to the child as a victim of violence. And so this writer, Shuttleworth, just referred to Francis Power Cobb's description in 1870 of old Hebrew necromancers obtaining oracles from a teraph, which was a decapitated head of a child placed on a pillar and compelled by magic to reply to the questions of the sorcerer. Shuttleworth makes the important point that commentators from Freud to Kristeva have argued that the severed head is of primary importance in Western culture. Kristeva asserted that severed heads teach us that the only resurrection possible may be representation in the severed head capital visions. But they don't necessarily say the severed head is that of a child. But as I talked about in my book, the idea of a lost child is, it's got this mingling of death and young life. So I suppose you could say that connects, if you like, with these rituals when it's about death and the idea of rebirth, divine child. Maybe it's all these things that connect in with these dark things that we hear about, what the powerful evil people do to, again, as ways of increasing their own power, things that we can't talk about on YouTube, but would again connect there with the idea of sacrifice and how it relates to children and how they can get power from that. So by changing the image to that of a child without his head, I don't know if I'm probably going to get banned now. The symbolism no longer supports Freud's theory of the Oedipal complex, where he argues in Totem and Taboo that the origins of culture lie in the murder of the father by a band of brothers. And instead of looking at the murderous desires of children towards their mothers or fathers, but rather at the violence of adults towards children. So, yeah, as I say, there's different interpretations of this idea of teraphim, what they could have been. And there's mentioned that there was several like early 19th century texts which had these teraphim as being the heads of children, but they were connected with, they were anti-Jewish texts, and they were probably using those sensational images to make attacks on Eastern religions and Judaism. The image is at once innocent and demonic, a child who is dead, yet an oracle of the future. So, like I say, it's surrounded by conjecture and different interpretations, but it was again mentioned by Mind Unveiled in one of the videos I saw of his, that there was the teraphim were of children. So I suppose that's another aspect to it, and potentially in this gory world, it would maybe, like I say, when you're talking about all these rituals of death and then rebirth, or somehow ritualistically, in the sort of sick minds, they would see even more power if it was connected to that. So yeah, in the excavation of Jericho, I think that's where that image is from, by Kathleen Kenyon. Evidence of the use of plastered human skulls as cult objects was uncovered, lending credence to this mention in rabbinical texts about these severed heads that somehow had the power to, as oracles, to divine the future. So you've then got this concept of something from the past, something that's dead, but somehow, as I say, you know, this ancient connection that the head was the center of the soul. But in this idea of the teraph or teraphin, that this then could predict the future. So then that's, you know, that's past and future somehow within the same object. And again, it's a severed head. So yeah, I won't keep you much longer, but I just wanted to mention something a bit more. Again, synchronicities. Thanks to our friend Sally, who lent me a wonderful book that she wrote around. She was in Orkney just in May, and she came up with some very interesting ideas, which again sort of struck chords with me. Now, William Sinclair, I think it was the as I say, there were a number of William Sinclairs. I think it was the William that actually started and built Rosslyn Chapel, but he was attached as a youth to the English household of Margaret, granddaughter of Edmund Ironsides, who was buried at Glastonbury. So we've got another little circle back to Glastonbury. Her brother Edgar the Atheling, more legitimate claim to the English crown than Harold or Norman William the Conqueror. Because of these connections to maybe a opposition to William the Conqueror, she was exiled in Hungary, where the King Stephen there was Catholic, and she married Malcolm, who became the King of Scotland. And this is the Malcolm that's in the story of Macbeth, which was an actual historical, you know, the character. These were real historical people, but, you know, it was made into the play by back to Shakespeare. There's so much more, I think, within that play that's connecting up again with these ideas that we've been talking about. So Malcolm defeated Macbeth, who had killed his father Duncan. Macbeth was in alliance with another cousin, the Earl Thorfinn of Orkney. So Malcolm married Margaret, and as I say, she was in exile in Hungary, and when she came back, when she married Malcolm and went back to Scotland, she took with her this holy relic that was given to her in Hungary, which was supposed to be a piece of the true cross in which Jesus was crucified, and this was enshrined in silver and gold, and this was the Holy Rood. And that's I didn't know this. I probably should have known this, but that's where you get the Holyrood, which is where in Edinburgh, where you got the seat of, it's now the place where the Scottish Parliament is. So again, there's a holy relic, which this Margaret has, which now the guardian of these holy relics was William Sinclair. So this idea that as I say, this man and the family, the Sinclairs, connected with the Templars, and then later the Masons, as it came into Freemasonry, and they were sort of seen as guardians of these holy relics. So I suppose that again ties into the people who feel that there's treasures buried beneath Rosslyn Chapel, and all the legends that come along there. You know, this idea that also that maybe this Templar treasures, that the people that escaped, the Templars that escaped to Scotland, and maybe there's some of those treasures, and including, again, in some people's legend, that the Holy Grail. But yeah, I thought it was really interesting what Sally was writing about, because this I didn't go into this in my talk on the Orkneys, but in Maeshal, this burial chamber, the one where I think is it a winter solstice, which would make sense in terms of, again, referring back again to the winter solstice, but the light shines through the entrance just at that time of year and sort of hits the back within this like burial mound, and it's in there, which was broken into many thousands of years later by these Vikings, and they've got all these different runic graffiti, and just like, I think it's supposed to be like the biggest collection of rune engravings or graffiti or something outside of Scandinavia, you know, and a lot of them there's some sort of jokey ones. But I think there is something which Sally makes mention to about travelers from Jerusalem, so that links maybe a later reference to that they were crusaders that had come through there. And there's this, it's only quite small, but this sort of partial engraving, which is quite famous, and they've got it on t-shirts and things like that, in the tourist place there nearby in the Orkneys. But this engraving on the wall within the Maeshal burial chamber. Now, it's called, well, a lot of people refer to it as the dragon. I know the guide that I had was saying it was actually sort of like one of these sort of medieval figures, where it's actually more like supposed to be like a lion, and you know, but to me the scales on there certainly, I think the guide was talking about, oh, it could be sort of just supposed to be hair, but it certainly looks like there's certainly a dragon aspect to this figure there. But Sally made a good point. She was sort of drawing herself around there, and she thought that this was, you know, like a figure with a sword going into the dragon. And I thought Sally, I think, made a very good point that this could be relating to a different Margaret. So as I say, there's Margaret, who was this queen married to Malcolm and had this holy rood, so holy relic. So she was very much revered, and I think maybe became a saint herself eventually, but she was certainly revered. But then there was this, there was a Saint Margaret of Antioch from, now there's two Antiochs, as I was mentioning to DJ in the chat before we got started. There's an Antioch in Syria and in what's now Turkey. I think it's the Syrian one, but there's this a saint, and a lot of people agree that it was almost 100% a mythical story of this Saint Margaret. But she was supposed to have been martyred for, you know, not wanting to give up her Christianity, one of those sort of stories. But she underwent terrible tortures before being killed. But one of the trials that she's supposed to have had was she was sort of swallowed up by a dragon, but she burst out through its stomach to kill it and escape. So again, another one of these legends around a dragon, but some sort of Christianized version. And I suppose, you know, so many of these Christianized things where they're, well, with knights, as with St. George, where they're killing the dragon. So as I said before, you've got the dragon that was connected with this goddess figure. But also the idea with these ancient rituals that the dragon aspect of the goddess was something that had to be faced, and yes, sort of defeated and usurped, but maybe not in a way where it was completely destroyed. That there was, I suppose, this idea of maybe acknowledging that shadow aspect, but not doing away with it completely. But I think what Sully is quite persuasive there, that does clearly look like something is sticking into the body there of the beast. And yeah, I can see, like, so obviously they didn't complete this, so hence it's open to interpretation to what the symbol is. But yeah, that looks to me like sort of a figure with maybe a cape or something like that. So I think Sally could be right, and she was tying it up. As I say, there's mention of Jerusalem travelers as well, with graffiti on there, my show. So and Sally rather brilliantly called it the unified Margaret theory, because she was saying that in the late, this Margaret that was the queen of Malcolm, within the popular consciousness of the people of the time, they would have connected her to this saint from the Holy Land. You know, in their minds, they would have, and for time after that, they would have become connected in their heads as being almost the same figure, as a saintly figure. Now, the Margaret of Antioch is like a patron saint of pregnant mothers, and this all goes again, connects to this legend of her bursting out of the stomach of the dragon. So it was a massive cult, and you know, in the medieval times, pregnant women would have whatever it was, sort of keepsakes or symbols, lockets type things of representing St. Margaret of Antioch to try and protect them through childbirth. So again, you've got the concept of birth, and connected with the dragon, who is, if you like, the dark aspect, the underworld, the goddess. So I think there's a lot of persuasive connections there, and it's obviously this was drawn thousands of years after the burial chamber was put there. But I think Sally's opened up a lot of interesting connections there with this idea of the Margarets in the consciousness being connected with different people. But I think the connection with Macbeth as well is really fascinating. I talked earlier about Ted Hughes, how he feels that these ancient legends about the goddesses and these sacrificing of the king, and how these went into the stories of Shakespeare, and just sort of looking at within the text of Macbeth, obviously the witch is there. There's 3 apparitions which Macbeth is presented with, including a helmet head, again sort of like a disembodied head. There's a bloody child, which says, if none of women born shall harm Macbeth. And the importance of this idea of, when Macduff eventually kills Macbeth, and he's like, oh, you can't kill me, no one of women born can kill me, and he's like, I'm not a woman born, I was from my mother plucked or whatever, so he was a cesarean birth, as am I, just to throw that in. Well, nothing's worth nothing. But that to me to sort of seem to hark back again to this Margaret of Antioch, bursting out of the dragon in some sort of strange version of a cesarean birth. And obviously the whole term cesarean birth is, Julius Caesar is supposed to have been born that way. So I guess you could say as well, it's connected there with the Roman Empire cesarean birth, and it's maybe in a way just was thinking it's like almost it's like it's a way maybe of sort of male sort of scientific medical establishment type people cutting the woman open to an artificial form of birth that bypasses the natural way of a child coming out. As I say, I was born that way, but I don't know, it just sort of struck me it's maybe one of these an early way that there was a division somewhere of the natural way of birth, and all these ideas of birth, as I say, within this sort of legendary mythic equation that Shakespeare used, and I think Ted Hughes makes a persuasive case that is all within the stories, and that's the idea of this boar, this destructive force, emerges from the goddess. So yeah, I don't know, I think I might, there we go, I might potentially have to say I'll probably leave it at that. Just seeing if I've missed anything crucial. I probably missed many things, but then we'll be talking other times, won't we? So yeah, just to mention again, say this Margaret with these had these holy relics, the Holy Rood, symbolized possession of holy blood of Christ. And then it's also connects as well, this, I think, connected with her, this the stone of destiny, which is where the kings and then the kings of Scotland and then the kings of Britain crowned over the stone of destiny, and that's supposed to represent the keystone of the Temple of Solomon and the bloodline again of the kings of Judah. And William St Clair was, as I say, the keeper of these relics. In return, his family given symbol on the shield of an engrailed cross. Scalloping edges of the cross in a series of cup shapes had three significances. It represented the chalice Grail at the Last Supper, which held the blood of Christ. That's the Christianized version of the Grail legend, which then got written into later Grail stories around King Arthur, and obviously again that connects back to Glastonbury and legends there of Joseph of Arimathea catching the blood of Christ at the crucifixion in this cup that was used at the Last Supper, and that is the Holy Grail within the Christian theology. So, and I don't know if it's significant. I know megalithic sites around the world. Hugh Newman, JJ Ainsworth from Megalithomania, talking about around the world, got these sort of cup shapes within these giant megalithic stones. So many places, it was in Turkey, but it's all over these megalithic sites. It's a common theme where you've got these cup shapes in the rock of these megaliths, of these ancient sacred sites. And they were saying maybe were these, did they contain water? Did they have water poured into them, or maybe blood? So then that makes me think again, is it looking what Maria Wheatley was talking about, how in the Neolithic times in Britain, these the bones of some of these revered women ground up and then put into the grooves of these pottery vessels. So were they connected there again? Was that something there when these megalithic stone sites? And as I say, you know, connections of magical stones like the Stone of Destiny, these meteorite stones that were revered and still are revered. If you look at Mecca, and if you connection there with something spiritual. So these megalithic sites where you've got cup shapes within the giant stones that make up, say, you know, ancient sites. Is that a uniting of the idea of a holy or a spiritually powerful cup or vessel, and it's within the actual stone itself? You've got both symbols as one there. So yeah, so as I say, the healing wells, is, you know, the idea of the land, the liquid blood of the land, the water. There was a healing well near Rosslyn where the blood of St. Catherine, another saint, was said to flow. And Queen Margaret, the Queen one, the Queen of Malcolm, was held to have started the natural flow by bringing a phial of the saint's blood from her tomb, from St. Catherine's tomb on Mount Sinai. And William St. Clair ordered the chapel to be built over this another well when he was given for life these lands of Rosslyn. As I say, he was a guardian of these holy artifacts. And again, as I say, the name St. Clair that they took from this saint in France, what's now France, all these connections of France. That again, the saint there was someone who lived by a well which had healing water. So all these links again and again. So I might have to stop rambling because I'm going to keep going on, and everyone's going to drop off. But I love you all. You're still there. How are we doing? Oh, green tea. When people were called blue blood, maybe there was more copper in their blood, making it look more blue. Yeah, cool. Interesting. Yeah. It's definitely that idea again when the people talk about bloodlines, and it's something intrinsic to these people, that these families and societies that want to keep power. Well, whether it was there something functional to the blood, the cup, the rituals, or the keeping the heads, or is it purely symbolic? I don't know. It's very interesting. I mean, maybe at some time that there was a functional element to it, and it became part of ritual over the centuries. I suppose that is the danger. I'm just thinking there of William Blake, another person I talked about, but you know, he used to talk about the spirit and the imagination, but then priests codified it, and it lost its, or it became a thing of just ritual, but losing its power, losing its authenticity, if you like. And that seems to me about what happened with Rick Calden. What a lovely face. You're talking about me, Rick? I hope so. It's very kind of you. Oh, sorry, Johnny, if it was a bit hard for you to see, but yeah, I really appreciate you all listening. I hope it's been of interest. I had a client who brought home a bit of plaster from Tutankhamun's burial chamber. Lovely bloke. It didn't end well for him. Oh dear. Wow. Yeah, I suppose you don't want to mess with those people, really. So DJ still disappointed, but not too holy hand grenades. Discussing in the chat at the beginning the holy hand grenade of Antioch. Good old Monty Python and the Holy Grail. I do really need to watch that again. Maybe the dragon story refers to the stars. Well, yeah, Green Tea, again, going back to the alchemy talks, and the dragon was, I think they were talking there about sort of three different, different versions of the dragon. The sort of, is it the Milky Way that, the way the stars were striking in the night sky in the sort of ancient world. There's Drago constellation that used to be on the top of the star system, if you like. So like if you like, a sort of pivot around which the heavens rotated in terms of how they saw it at that time, centuries ago. Talking again of Andrew Collins' sort of theories around what Göbekli Tepe was pointed at the time it was built, and this Drago constellation, and that sort of Drago is the dragon. So I think a lot of it, I think it does relate to the stars as which I suppose, again, as I could say about the importance of meteorite stones as sort of symbols of the gods or something spiritual, or the underworld afterlife. So again, that's a good point, going back to those other talks. Again, the stone coming from the heavens, the stone coming from the dragon. That's a good point. That's a good thing to think about, I think. The idea of that St. Margaret of Antioch bursting out of the belly of the dragon, the meteorite stone falling from the stars to the earth. It could be a similar sort of symbolism there. Well, I hope you're all well. I appreciate you all hi Rachel. Thank you for joining. I'm gonna probably have to call it a night now, but please listen back. Thanks, Margaret. I hope it's been of interest. I'm gonna read back through your comments when I've recovered myself. But yeah, it'd be good to read back through your chat. And Richard III, was it, in green tea that was found in the car park? I think it was Richard III, and that was apparently a psychic that had some sort of vision, or just knew where the place was where they'd find the bones, and they did, but they don't mention that in the mainstream. Okay, my people, I'll shut up now. I love you all, and see you again soon. Thanks so much for following and listening, and I'll speak to you again soon. Bye bye.